Since the beginning, philosophy has asked itself one question: what is universal? And yet, every answer to this question has failed. In the 20th century, and because of this failure, it was believed that philosophy was dead. But the death of universality is not the end of philosophy, but its natural conclusion. This conclusion has resulted in a remarkable inversion. Universality, once the primary goal of philosophy, is now its most dangerous opponent. And if we are to confront this opponent, we must first understand its history. To guide us through this process are the two spirits of philosophy, the spirit of the question and the spirit of the answer. Together, they will guide us through the history of universality, which has really been the history of philosophy, and lead us towards a new beginning. If I were to ask you, what is universal? What would you say? I would say that I don't know. But one of these philosophers might. Perhaps they have an answer. Thales, let's ask you, what is universal? Water. Water is universal. It exists forever. And you, Anaximenes? What do you say? Air is universal. Air exists forever. And you, Heraclitus? Fire is universal. Fire exists forever. Anaximander, you seem rather quiet. What do you think? Well, if we say that this or that particular thing is eternal, water, air, or fire, we must also say that time and space are eternal, because if they were not, neither water, nor air, nor fire could exist forever. Therefore, time and space are themselves universal. We agree, Democritus and Lepicus said. But if we say that time and space are eternal, must we not also say that everything within it, so all matter, not just this or that particular thing, is also eternal? And since water, air, and fire change over time, one becoming the other, we must suppose that there is this sort of universal and eternal substance from which all matter is comprised. So, atoms. Atoms are universal. But if we say that time, space, and matter are in fact eternal, Parmenides added, we must say that either everything changes forever, as Heraclitus would have us believe, or that change itself is an illusion. Anaxagoras, pondering this for a moment, then said, but if we say that change is an illusion, we must also say that time and space have a beginning, that they are not in fact eternal. But if we say that, how can anything within our reality be universal? Instead, there must be something outside of time and space which is eternal, a sort of cosmic mind, which itself must be eternal, and started this process, this illusion of change. Tell us, the question asked. What is this cosmic mind, Anaxagoras? I don't know, he replied. I think I can answer your question, Socrates interjected. All these pre-Socratics have been looking for some universal thing. Instead, we ought to be looking for some knowledge which is universal. I like this idea, the question responded. So in your estimation, what knowledge is universal? But before Socrates could answer, he fell victim to the Athenian tyranny, leaving his most capable student, Plato, to complete his work. The problem we run into when we propose universal knowledge is the same problem the pre-Socratics ran into when they posited that a particular thing, be it water, air, or fire, is universal. Namely, if we say that some knowledge is universal, then we must say that all knowledge is universal. Okay, the question responded. But if all knowledge is universal, where does this knowledge come from? The world? No, Plato replied. Universal knowledge comes from outside the world, from what I call the world of the forms, which exists outside of space and time. And as such, this world is eternal, containing the complete and universal forms of everything, so an absolute form of the good, or an absolute form of a chair. But Plato, Aristotle said, you have just presupposed that all knowledge is universal. If we say that universal knowledge is possible, then we must either say that we can never attain universal knowledge, or that time and space are eternal, because universal knowledge, just like an eternal thing, be it water, air, or fire, would only be possible in a reality which is likewise eternal. So, what you call the forms don't exist outside the world, but within it, within particular things. See these apples and this door? You might notice that both are red. Thus, they both participate in the same universal archetypal form of redness. Okay, the question responded, but what is redness in itself? Red is a colour, Aristotle replied. Yes, but so is blue. Are you saying that red is blue? No, but there must be something which is particular to the nature of redness, even if we don't know exactly what it is. It seems to me that what you're really saying, Aristotle, is that universal knowledge exists, but that we don't know exactly what it is. So let me ask you this. If we know it exists, but we don't know what it is, how can we say that it exists? I don't know, Aristotle responded. These Greeks are infuriating. Every single one of them, useless. After 400 years, they have, each and every one of them, failed to give me a satisfactory answer. What is universal? Oh, relax, the answer said. After all, it's only been 400 years. They'll figure it out. You just need a little faith. Faith? What a great idea! Let's try that. Augustine, what do you say? What is universal? God is universal. What about time, space, or matter? Are they eternal? No, because to say that time, space, or matter are eternal would be to contradict the power of God. Simply put, if we say that any of these three things are universal, if we say that they do in fact exist forever, then how could God have created them? I see. And what about universal knowledge? Universal knowledge within the world of space and time is not possible, but Plato was half right. Universal knowledge does exist outside of the world, but not in the forms, as he would say. Instead, it exists in the mind of God. I see. But why is universal knowledge within the world of space and time not possible? I don't know. Aquinas, observing this, then said aloud, "Since Augustine doesn't really provide a reason as to why universal knowledge is incorrect, I see no reason why it isn't and shouldn't be possible. Maybe Aristotle was right. Maybe universal truth and knowledge does exist in the world." Nonsense, Occam said. What Aristotle and you call universals are just names. Red is just a name, not some abstract universal knowledge. Those apples and that door are just individual things which happen to be red. Universals don't exist in the world. Interesting, the question said. You say that universals don't exist in the world, but what about the mind? Do they exist in the mind? I don't know, Occam replied. Maybe Descartes can give us an answer. Descartes, can the human mind have universal knowledge which does not originate from the world? Yes, and I will explain why. All knowledge which we gain from the world can be doubted. How do you, for example, know that what you're actually experiencing right now is real? How do you know that you are not in fact dreaming? So, if we doubt everything which can be doubted, where then does that leave us? I would argue that the one thing which cannot be doubted is the fact that I exist, and that I think. And since the argument that I am not thinking would be a contradiction, we can therefore say that I think, therefore I am. There. Universal knowledge is possible. Wrong, Hume said. Descartes, universal knowledge is not possible. This Enlightenment project, bifurcated between your rationalists and Aristotle's empiricists, is a complete waste of time. I hate to say it, but here I must agree with Augustine. Universal truth and knowledge is not possible. And I will tell you exactly why. There is, to my mind, two types of knowledge, relations of ideas and matters of fact. Now, the first category of knowledge, relations of ideas, simply rearrange the information we already have within our own minds. If we take Aristotle's own logic, for example, all men are mortal, and that Greeks are all men, and therefore all men are mortal, this statement, which appears to be true, is really a tautology, which adds no new knowledge. We already know what men, mortals, and Greeks are. The fact that men are mortal is true by definition. In this respect, Descartes, your own argument is already highly suspect. What is this I that thinks exactly? I myself encounter no solid I which thinks, just a bundle of perceptions and sensations. As for you empiricists, and I'm including you, Aristotle and Aquinas, I have this to say. Just as we cannot establish universal truth from the subject, we cannot establish it from the object either. This is because all knowledge which we gain from sense perception cannot give us any information about the world of which we can be 100% certain. Let me ask you this. Can we be universally certain that the sun will in fact rise tomorrow? Is this a universal truth, or only a probability? Even if we say, with a 99.9% probability, that the sun will indeed rise tomorrow, we cannot say that it is beyond all doubt. Maybe the physicists are wrong. Maybe the sun burns through all of its hydrogen and helium fuel 4 billion years early, and dies all of a sudden. Maybe it's consumed by a black hole, which none of us have seen. Maybe tomorrow is the day some hidden law of the universe is triggered, which prevents the sun from rising. All unlikely cases, yes, but still entirely plausible. Probably. In any case, what I'm really trying to get at here is that all information we have, regardless of its origin, is subject to constant re-verification. Either way, universal knowledge is not possible. I must give it to you, Hume. You are right, the question said. But there is one slight problem which you haven't dealt with. If universality and causality do not come from experience, then where do they come from? Exactly, Kant said. Universality and causality cannot come from the object. Therefore, they must come from the human mind. What this means is that the human mind is not passively receiving information, but actively structures the means through which information, and by extent experience itself, is possible. Think of it like this. Before we can experience anything, the mind must have already structured the a priori forms and categories through which it can experience anything. This does not mean that the mind creates time and space. Rather, time and space are the forms of intuition which the mind structures, and which in turn shape the things which appear to us. And causality is not a feature of sensibility, but an a priori category, like the others, of understanding which orders events. But here we enter into a slight problem, in the fact that this structure, the structure of the mind, prevents us from accessing things in themselves. Consequently, it prevents us from accessing universality as it is in itself. But ironically, this structure is also necessary for experience. So time and space are universally necessary for experience. This will always be true. But we can never know exactly what space, time, or causality, or even universality are in themselves. What this means is that universality exists for us, because it is a necessary precondition for us to experience anything, but we can never know what the universal is in itself, because that lies beyond the preconditions of what is possible for us to experience. But Kant, in saying that we cannot know universality, but that it exists necessarily, haven't you just entered into the same problem as Aristotle did with his universals? Oh, enough philosophy, Kant said. It's a waste of time. All we really need to know is this. If we say that universality is a necessary precondition for the subject, then must we not also say that it is a necessary precondition for the object? And whilst we may not know what this universality is, in itself, as Kant likes to say, we can know that the world operates through provisional laws which are universal. For instance, time or space or mathematics. I concur, Russell said, but I will also go one step further. If we say that universality is a necessary precondition for the subject, as well as the object, I would argue that mathematical truths are universal and exist not only in our minds as mental constructs, but as a universal law which governs the structure of reality itself. But Russell, all so-called universally complete and formal systems, including mathematics, are themselves incomplete, because such basic axioms cannot be proven from within the system itself. Even arithmetic must assume that 1 plus 1 does in fact equal 2. That's a fair argument, Kripke said, but instead of universality in mathematics, what about semantic universality? For example, whilst we may not know what water or H2O are in themselves, to borrow Kant's terminology, we can know universally that water must in fact equal H2O, and we can say this is universally true, necessarily, and in all possible worlds. Okay, time out. This is really getting out of hand. If universality is a precondition for the subject, but it is also unknowable, then the same must be true for the object. All these analytical philosophers seem to be chasing the same thing, which, by their own internal logic, can never be reached. How is it possible that they haven't realised this yet? Did they just disregard Hume? Or are they really that dogmatic? Don't worry, Deleuze said. I'll take it from here. The problem with Western philosophy is that it assumes knowledge to be this kind of static universal. The words H2O and water change. Our conceptions of gender, reality, and morality change. Nothing is fixed. Knowledge cannot be universal, because knowledge, like reality, is always changing. But Deleuze, your critique isn't wrong. But when you say that everything is always changing, including knowledge, aren't you just reformulating that very same problem we find in Heraclitus? And I promise you, that ontological universality, that everything is always changing, which is what you effectively say, presupposes the very same epistemological universality which you're trying to dismantle. Okay, enough, Nietzsche said. Have you ever considered that after 2,500 years, that the problem lies not with our answers, but with your question? And how many times can you ask us this same question, what is universal, expecting us to give you a different answer? You know that's the definition of madness, right? And every answer we give always leads to the same place, back into metaphysics, and into the same response, I don't know. Okay, Nietzsche, so what question should I ask? Well, to start, have you ever considered that maybe universality isn't even possible? What do you think I meant when I announced that God is dead and we have killed him over a century ago? I did mean that, sure, but not only in the literal sense. You see, for me, God is also a metaphor for universality itself. So what I really meant to say is that yes, God is dead, but also that universality is dead and philosophy has killed it. Why? Well, I've already told you. Either we say that universality doesn't exist, or that it does exist but that we can never know it. This doesn't mean that we should do away with universality, but we should do away with the presupposition that it exists necessarily. That is the question which my philosophy was trying to answer, and the question which you should be asking. Reflecting on the history of Western philosophy over its 2,500-year history, what could we say about it? It ought to be clear by now that the history of Western philosophy is the history of universality, and now it is the history of its overcoming. Since the beginning, philosophy has tried and failed again and again to establish universality, either in some thing, some truth, some knowledge, some equation, some mental faculty, or some existential precondition. But what happens when we question the question itself? What happens when we reject the very question from which philosophy first began? What if universality is not even possible? And now that this question has been laid bare, we can finally say that the last Aion of philosophy is over. The only question is, where do we go from here? If the last Aion of philosophy was dominated by the search for better answers, perhaps the next will be dominated by the search for better questions. So, without further ado, let's begin.